some of my heroes on this panel. So some of them came from a long way. I'm really appreciative, and some came from New Haven. I'm also appreciative. I live here too, and excited to talk about the Civic Century. I've been doing more work locally in building connection and seeing that as being an important part of health, of fun, and of democracy. And so that's what we're here to talk about today, is the time when many communities feel increasingly fragmented. How do we rebuild trust and a sense of belonging? My name is Miles Lassiter. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves and say a little bit about the work you've done that's relevant to our conversation. And then I will go to one of our questions after that.
Andrew Ferguson, great to be with you all. I'm founder of Redwood Endeavors, which is a platform for multiple public benefit initiatives, two of which I'll weave through today. Redwood Fellows, and good to be with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angel DeFay. I am the manager of public program and activations for the New Haven Green. I'm also an entrepreneur and the founder of Sweets and Sounds Entertainment. So I do programming on the Green year-round, but I also do programming through my company where I intersect arts, culture, food, music, and try to bring people together.
All right. I'm Sam Pressler. I am the Chief Tissue Officer at Connective Tissue. We're a newsletter on the community's commitments and connections that make life worth living. We basically put out pieces that are imaginative, practically actionable, substantive, but also kind of silly and irreverent. We have a membership network of civic practitioners from across the country who are part of Connective Tissue. We also do experiments where we think the future of civic life is mimetic, and the way that scale happens is more people in more places committing to strengthening the civic life of their particular places for longer periods of time, and the way that we do that is by using memes. So we're working with New Haven, who's doing microgrants here. They're part of an experiment we're doing with like neighborhood gathering microgrants. We've done experiments around activities fairs for adults and those kind of things. And then I do academic research through my affiliations with Harvard Human Flourishing Program.
Hey, y'all. I'm Zoe. I work for Citizen University. CU thinks about citizenship not as a piece of paper or a legal status, but as a role that it's important for each person to lean into and define for themselves in relationship to their community. So at CU, we design learning experiences and local experiments that help to more deeply understand the many answers to this question of what makes someone decide to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. How do they co-design a role that's right for them? And then how do they sustain that with the habits and skills of citizenship in ways that are really relational, practical, actionable, and rooted in the context of their local community?
Well, thank you all. And I want to appreciate the audience for, you heard the H word said and you didn't boo. So thank you. Is social fragmentation primarily a structural problem, work hours or zoning or childcare or something, or a cultural one like individualism, screens, distrusting? Discuss.
Yes. To think that these are distinctive things is to actually reinforce the fragmentation that we have, right? Culture influence structure, structure influence culture, and vice versa. For instance, when we live in single-family zoned communities, that reinforces a structure of individualism that then affects every element of how we show up in our day-to-day lives. That then becomes a cultural norm that forms us to then reinforce living in individually zoned, isolated communities rather than in things like co-housing developments or kibbutzes or other forms of living that are present all over the world. And so the answer is a yes and. I think the challenge and the nature of this moment is that we've both been we have a structural sense that there are outside forces that are outside of our control that are affecting influence both on and that structure is affecting like our own cultures of agency and feelings that we can influence the environments around us. And I think that's why a panel like this and this topic is really interesting, because like the particular place you live, the neighborhoods in which you live, are the places where you still have the ability to affect change. And so that would be my first crack at that answer.
I also think one of the reasons why bothness is so overwhelming and why there tends to be such a rejection of the idea that it's probably both is because, as Sam's saying, it's really hard to work on both yourself all the time. So like an organization like mine, where we know that we specifically work on culture, it can get really tempting to be like, but what about structure? We're totally ignoring structure. Like we're limp as an organization because we're not thinking about structure. And I think it can be really valuable for civic practitioners, particularly when you get the opportunity to be in relationship with each other, to say, okay, we're going to think about culture. You think about structure. We know that they're both important, but how can we break down the elements of the things that are like eating away at civic life, and work together to create more networks of understanding of the various strategies that it's going to take to repair. And then definitely, as Sam's saying, to like seed those things on the local level, but to not get tempted by the idea that like we either have to choose, or that if it's both, everyone has to do both.
Yeah, I think it's, I agree with both. I think it's structural first, because I think like you cannot blame individuals for the disconnection that comes from the infrastructure that like strip the structure away. So yeah, I think it's structural first, and then culture follows like immediately after.
I'm curious, is belonging a prerequisite for civic participation, or is it a product of that? Do you get involved first and then feel like you belong?
I think belonging is a product because there's some people that feels that they belong somewhere, and then there's some people who has always felt excluded from different spaces. So yeah, I think it's definitely a product first. Yeah.
Zoe, did you have something?
Well, I definitely think it's a product. And I think that like there's this idea of like there's a difference between fit and belonging, right? Like you might be able to fit in somewhere, but it might take a ton of effort, or you feel like you're allowed to be the way that you are, but you're not really valued for being the way that you are. So there's like a general tolerance, which is different from belonging. And I think the way that you get from like, I have the skills to fit in, or like people tolerate me here, to a sense of belonging is by having a role that's right for you. And so I think there's this idea that like leaning in, choosing to participate, but also being in a community where there's the opportunity to like inhabit a role that makes sense for you, where maybe doesn't take you so much effort to fit in, can be a pathway to being valued for the way that you are, which is like the thing that makes belonging different from fit. So I think you can create belonging through participation that is not civic. And then maybe that kind of belonging could be an ingredient in civic participation because you've been used to participating in another way, which has helped you feel valued. And now you're like, oh, whoa, I'm valued for my skills on this bowling team or whatever, and now I can like think about what my skills are that help me to feel valued, and how can I activate those skills in the civic space. But I definitely think that belonging emerges from doing something together so that you have the opportunity to feel valued.
And should that participation feel like a duty or like fun? Andrew, what do you think?
Whatever it takes to get the person participating. But I've spent a lot of this year basically going to town by town across this state, just listening to people who are the most active volunteers and civic leaders in their community, to learn so much about what they do, but also what motivates them, how they first become that. And what I've heard more often than not is things around belonging and fun and purpose and relationships. I've heard those motivations and those connectors in the civic life far more often than duty or obligation in terms of motivations. And so if we had to answer one of your either or questions, I certainly would lean more on the fun side as opposed to the duty side.
It's a very Tyler Cowen type experience I'm having right now. He's just like rapid fire, like binaries. Like there's no, I reject the binaries. In different contexts, different things are going to be what draw people out. I spent 7 years building what's now the largest community arts organization in the country for veterans and military families. What provides the container for belonging is a shared sacrifice, a shared struggle, and a shared obligation to uphold, a mission. That is a very strong and sturdy container for belonging. I also, because it was a stand-up comedy program, partially for veterans, like the thing that brought people into that container for belonging was something that was joyful and silly and fun. And so two people can inhabit completely different needs for belonging and drives for belonging in different contexts, both communally and within their own stage of the life course. And so I think being flexible and responsive to what are the particular needs of a particular place and the particular people in those places is the answer, rather than a kind of false binary between, it's obligation or it's joy. It's like, yes, these are all parts of what makes a holistic experience of community.
I also think fun is the least useful when it's pitted against seriousness. Like, I think if you say, like, we're going to do this thing that we hate, and then later on we're going to get to have some fun and it's going to be silly, like, that's when fun is not useful to us. That's when fun doesn't unlock imagination. That's when fun doesn't help us, like, move through a challenging problem. That's when fun, like, doesn't help us have the desire to show up for each other. But I think when we say, like, actually fun can be sometimes a way through the things that are most challenging, a way of claiming a duty or a responsibility. Like, it actually is most powerful in its combination with duty.
So civic participation has historically been for people who have time, money, social capital. What have you seen succeed to draw people in who might be lacking one or more of those?
So you said time, money.
Time, money, social capital.
I could start. I think the kind of classic example that's given is kind of disaster response. And like what disaster response is getting at is there's a shared challenge for people in a particular place that the only way you can get through it is solve it together. And I think part of the challenge, frankly, of like where we are in American civic life is that we've sorted ourselves to death, especially by class, with the college degree as the dividing line in American civic life. And so people who go to places like Yale and who live in these types of places and work in the types of jobs that people who go to Yale work in, and who go to the types of cafes that people who go to Yale work in, have no forms of organic solidarity with people who've been left behind. And so there's a feeling that that you can actually do without them. And actually you can go and move through the world without ever encountering people who have been left behind by the way that we've designed society. And that is a deeply difficult state of the reality that we're in today. I think the places where you still see it happen are in religious institutions. Religious institutions create something that is bigger than yourself, that when done well, religious institutions can also be the most sordid, Sunday being the most sordid and segregated space in America, but when done well, creates something that is transcendent beyond the things that divide us. And so if I were to say, where are my sources of hope? Like, my sources of hope are in addressing shared needs tied to some form of bonding social capital, for lack of better words, that transcends the class racial divisions that kind of underpin our current state in this country. Thank you. I'd like you guys in the first row.
You got fans.
So affirming.
You got fans in the first row here.
Don't give them a
I'm curious, is there is there a sub-problem that you wish like more people would focus on in this broad space? Like a particular issue that you wanna highlight, like Sam was highlighting those that don't have a college degree, and you recently published a study on men without college degrees, for example. If you don't have one, that's okay. I was just wondering if any of you have a particular problem area that you want to highlight and hope someone will do some innovation on.
No, I'll just add that.
He says a panel, not stuff Sam showed.
I think the sub problem I would address is that thinking the way that we're going to solve these is using the methodologies of entrepreneurial innovation. Like this idea that we need to focus in on myopic sub problems, like all these things are interconnected. And the only way that you're going to rebuild civic life in this country is by building many overlapping webs of association so that we're not just dependent on one form of association to which we can belong, but that we have many overlapping webs. So let's say you no longer are part of your sewing club, you still are a member of your church, or you're having issues with your family, you have the union to fall back on. And that is not an individual innovation thing. That is a challenge of seeing a community as a holistic connected organism, not a machine that we can refine in some ways to optimize some points of output. Like the entire machine logic, I went to Stanford Business School, I've seen machine logic in practice. The entire machine logic is antithetical to the ways that we're going to build community life from the bottom up. And so I think if I were to have a myopic problem that I was going to focus on, I would say undoing the machine logic that has contributed to this very state that we're in right now.
Any solutions or bright spots that you want to highlight? Could be from your own work.
Bright spots. You guys must have bright spots.
So building on some of that, a state like Connecticut. So a state like Connecticut, New England state, 169 towns, we are hyper-local in almost everything we do, from how we govern ourselves to how we behave, to how we congregate, right? You name it. Hyper-local in terms of the structure, the machine of the machine. And so I very much agree, Sam, with what you've said, but then how you actually get that done in a state like Connecticut, such that you aren't just doing it in your neighborhood or your community, but ultimately transcending different divides, so that in Connecticut you can get not just to the structural, but also the cultural change that I think we would all aspire to. That's hard. That's hard because of how Connecticut is built and how it's fragmented. So partly what I'm trying to do through the time that I have is trying to build solutions to that issue of fragmentation in a state like Connecticut. So two specific examples to that. One is called Redwood Fellows, and coincidentally, there are a number of Redwood Fellows in the room today. That's folks who have influence. They are running things in this state, and yet too often they aren't actually in community together. They know of each other, but they don't really know each other, right? They aren't showing up for each other, especially when they're from a different political party, a different generation, a different part of the state, a different sector, right? We're back to kind of our groups. That, to me, is a major opportunity. It's one that if we don't seize, it's really hard to envision a state like Connecticut, how the rest of what we aspire to get done becomes possible. And so Redwood Fellows is one example of that. A second is the neighborhood. Every town has this group of incredible people, much like you, right? What you're doing in Dixwell, like incredible people who are doing the lion's share of civic work in their communities. How do we help them? How do we support them? How do we help get more people as involved in every single town in this state? What do they need? Part of what we're doing in response to questions like those is creating something called the Neighborhood, Connecticut's Network for Service. All of that, I think, is getting to what Sam is describing in a state that is as structurally fragmented as Connecticut.
I also think, I think these are great examples of connecting people so that the overlapping networks that Sam's talking about are in conversation with each other. They know about each other. They can mutually reinforce each other. I think there's another complementary approach, which is not only having the networks know about each other, not only having people know about each other, but how can we actually solve one problem with the solution to another problem. So thinking about how, you mentioned these barriers towards participation, things like money, time, childcare, et cetera, and how can we stack the solutions to those problems in order to create a more innovative, to use the lingo of the day, solution. I think about just one specific example, an organization that CU has done a lot of work with in Shreveport, Louisiana, Community Renewal, and they have a housing shortage. They have a lack of job security, especially in particular communities. It's sort of a checkerboard community, and there's some communities where there's super high instance of poverty, super low instance of employment, whereas other communities have a lot more access to resources. And there are young people in these communities who are not getting enough academic, social, emotional support. And not only the young people, but the families themselves not having access to the types of resources that could really result in the type of flourishing that causes people to lean in and participate. And what Community Renewal does is build houses in neighborhoods that are both a home and a community center, hire people to live in that house and run the community center. So solving this, having partially a solution to a housing problem, partially a solution to an employment problem, partially a solution to an after-school opportunity problem, partially a solution to the problem of does a young person in a community have a trusted adult who's not just their parents? And sort of figuring out how to braid all these solutions together into a rope that is a way stronger community solution, rather than saying how can we get poor people to participate like the rest of us, right? It's really how can we strengthen communities because people have access to the types of solutions that solve a lot of problems at once, and then those solutions are more sticky.
Yeah, I think for me, part of the solution for me is through the work that I do through the New Haven Green, right? It's one civic place that brings different people from different backgrounds together. And I think depending on basically the proximity and then also the community, right? I think proximity is geography and the community is choice. So for example, you can live next to someone for 10 plus years and absolutely know nothing about them. And I don't think I wouldn't consider that your community, right? Because I think there has to be actual intention, reciprocity, and choice behind that. You have to be able to give something, but also be able to take something as well. So yeah, I think that through the New Haven Green and through the programming that I do through there, because for me, programming and bringing people together is part of my solution, based on whatever gender, background, race, whatever it is. It's part of how I solve that.
I'm curious your thoughts on how this work gets funded today and what you'd like to see change about that.
How the work of
civic participation, creating belonging, the broad category of things we've been talking about. There's a question for everyone. You can respond if you want.
I think it's funded through funders. I think it. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of the time. I think that people try to accommodate what their mission statement is to build to accommodate what the funder wants. So I think it's all. Well, for me, I've seen that multiple times through different people, different organizations trying to mold and shape into what the funder wants. I think we need funding from people that understand the mission and backs what it is without trying to come in and implement too many changes. But yeah.
Yeah, I would build on that. I think part of the challenge we're seeing in civic life today is a challenge of business model and a challenge of governance model. And so the kind of, some of you guys have probably read Robert Putnam. He wrote Bowling Alone. He wrote The Upswing. He's like the guy people point to. And the civic life that was built in the 20th century, the seeds of that were planted in the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, where we were in a time very similar to this one. We had mass disruption from industrialization. We had great wealth inequality. And what ended up happening was these kind of bottom-up federated membership networks formed that had this fundamental alignment between membership, the kind of constituent of the organization, revenue, the dues-paying member, and governance. The members were decision makers for that organization. And the civic life that was built in this country was built by the federated membership network. Think about the YMCA, you can think about the Rotary, you can think about the NAACP. All of these organizations, when they started, they were member-driven, and decision-making started at the lowest level, and it scaffolded up. And what happened in the 1960s is we shifted from the kind of the participatory democratic governance within these organizations to more funder-driven organizations that came from the top down, right? So this is what Theda Skocpol, a political scientist, calls diminished democracy. So now the dynamic is we have people over here who are giving money, and then you have people over here, or the community that you're serving. And that's created more transactional relationships. It's created more brittle organizations. And it's created, frankly, more room for outside influence, whether it's from, super left funders who are in New York or Washington, or super right funders that kind of dictate the influence of the direction of specific communities. And so part of my answer would be we need to realize that alignment, right? There's a need to realign membership, revenue, and governance such that what you're talking about, instead of getting, this funder is telling you this thing over here, and then you're chasing that, and then you go this, well, actually, what does your constituency want? And that should be what's driving it. So I think that would be one. I think two is, where is the money coming from? Because there's going to be a bridge between my utopian world where we don't need to rely on outside philanthropy and where we are right now. And so what is that bridge? I would make the case that the most well-positioned local funders of civic life should be community foundations. Community foundations have skin in the game. Presumably, they should be able, the person who runs your community foundation should be able to run into you at the grocery store. And if they're screwing up, you should be hey, you're screwing up, right? Right now, the Ford Foundation is not based in your community. And so when the Ford Foundation decides what your community is doing, you have no reason for organic accountability there. So if community foundations should have a $5 to $10 million fund in every place, or whatever number it is, and the specific goal is just to strengthen civic life of this place, right? Like what you guys are doing with the Civic Works Department, with the micro grants, right? Every community in the United States should have micro grants for neighbors to gather with neighbors, and a community foundation for $10,000 a year could fund that micro grant, and they can have long-term impacts for neighbors gathering with one another. So that's where I would begin. There's more. We could start the real estate fund next, but I'll stop.
I heard a request from more from the audience.
Well, I like the way you're thinking about this bridge of we know we can envision the world we want to get to, and we know we're going to need a bridge to get there in terms of how this type of work gets funded. I think another bridge is for organizations like mine to be willing to have conversations with funders where we're let's adjust your priorities, right? From a position of relative funding safety, what is the responsibility for organizations to have conversations with their funders about, to be the bridge specifically between the funding and the people we're hoping to serve, and to always have our allegiance towards the communities that we're in relationship with and striving to support, and have a circulatory relationship, not only around resources, but also around input and ideas. And so what is a role that an organization who does get a lot of funding from major foundations have to be a connector between the people who are accessing the work and the people who are funding the work, and to push back and say, actually, we think that you need to fund this and that instead, and let's have a conversation about why.
To build on some of Sam's point about community foundations, I agree with a lot of it. But I also, I've spent 20 years in Connecticut. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out where is the capital in a state like Connecticut. Greenwich, which gets to the broader point, because at least when I hear these questions, and when I hear answers to these questions, too often when you hear funder, you go to foundation, or you go to an institution that's got a website, or you go to a community foundation. If you look at the market of Connecticut, of where is the money, That's the smaller fraction of the whole. And if you look at trend lines of what's accelerating versus not, that's accelerating less than where the money is, which is independently wealthy households. And to Sam's point, about some of the community foundations, they have very little dollars under discretionary control of their professional staff, very little. And so to me, part of what we're all saying there should be more of, more civic life participation, more belonging, more crossing differences, more building, right, all of that. That's actually the solution to the money problem. Because all of these independently wealthy households in Connecticut that have skyrocketing wealth, they're all not going to create foundations. Some will put money in DAFs, but not all. Ultimately, the path toward solving our challenge of how do we make a better, healthier, more prosperous, however you want to label it, Connecticut, how do we get more civic life, is by building relationships across difference, is by figuring out how to get folks in New Haven meeting with folks in Greenwich and vice versa, just to pick that as a town since you referenced them. That is the to me, very hard work, but that is the only path toward getting sufficient capital to ultimately do what we, I think, all aspire to get
Can I ask you a question on that? So what is the what is the means of accountability for Ray Dalio to stay committed to some kind of need of a community rather than finding something? Now I'm interested in AI. Right, in AI's disruption. Because I think the people who've been on the receiving end of philanthropy for many years, oh yeah, we're really committed to this thing. And then they go to a dinner party and they hear about this other thing and oh wow, we're really committed to that thing. And then there's all these people who are waiting in the lurch. And so I think I agree to your point, right? Community foundations are just a drop in the bucket. I think what I'm really interested in is part of democracy is accountability, right? Because you introduced this in connecting civic life to democracy. And I think leaving the future of our democracy up to the whims of a small percentage of people who are now benefiting from kind of potentially one of the most substantial periods of wealth creation if you own capital, that feels like it could actually run counter to the democratic norms that we're trying to build. So I'm curious how you think about that in your response.
So he's an outlier in the system, so certainly won't speak to him specifically.
No, you don't have to critique or
it's the first time that we're sitting together today, but we have a dear shared friend, Eric Clemens. And Eric talks often about you can't love someone until you know someone, quote him. Right? You can't love someone until you know someone. I deeply believe that. I think part of the Connecticut problem, based on how we're set up, 169 towns, fragmented in all these ways, hyper-local in how we behave and congregate, et cetera, right? That cuts against our ability to love someone because we don't know someone. And so part of this is not going to the top of the top in terms of our income brackets, but it's going to the vast majority of folks in this state, across the vast majority of our towns, across all political parties. And it's trying to find ways to build meaningful relationship together so that we know each other. Because I'm confident that if we can do that with more and more of residents in this state across all of these differences in meaningful ways, we can then, with more and more of them, start to build deep trust. Not with all, but with more. And if we can build deep trust with more folks, you have a better chance of getting to a place of actually showing up for each other. Because you love folks, you understand folks, and you find ways, to have common mission. And, that as I look across this room, there's so many folks in this room that has been my experience in this state. I know that's not the experience for all, but certainly it's been mine. And it's one that if we can keep doing that with more and more folks, because we are only 1 degree of separation in terms of having not met until today, but yet we have this shared friend, I bet that's true for each of us in this room. And so that, to me, is where my energy is, because if we all can make meaningful progress in that space, the numbers are such that you don't have to achieve everything. Just achieve half, and we'll be so wildly better off than we are today.
All right. Really nice discussion. I really appreciate the back and forth here. I'd love to take it in a different direction. Is there something you've changed your mind about in this work that's meaningful that you want to share? Something you believed that now you think differently about?
Something I've changed my mind about was looking around and thinking that the success of, for example, an event that I did was based on the amount of people that was in the room. I think at first, for me, that was super important to me. I wanted to get as many people out as possible to see this thing that I feel like would help them so much, or to experience this thing that I feel like they would need. And to me, in the past, like 300, 500 people in a room is like, it's very successful. That's great. And then the feedback over time was like 300, 500 people in the room, 10 people out of that 300 was actually impacted, and that shifts my mindset on what I deem as success to what I was doing for the community. And for me now, success is making sure that there's many people impacted in the programmings and the things that I do, and not just the attendance of people that are there. Is there something that you took away from this program or this event that I did that you're still using 5 years down the line, or that you're still implementing in your everyday life? And that definitely has changed for me.
Yeah, one recent one is what the role of technology can be. I'm continue to be very skeptical of the role of technology, but I've have one friend. He started something called the Relational Tech Project, and he's using AI to create neighborhood level tech for like 10 to 100 people. And so by using tools like Lovable, he was able to create like a community supply sharing site. He tested that site out in his neighborhood in San Francisco. He has now, through like a meme, he has 200 neighborhoods across the country using a remixed version of his community supply sharing site. It's tech after, basically it's tech after platforms. Like the end of SaaS is that actually we can all create our tech at the level of relationships. And actually that has like very much changed my mind in terms of where there can be roles for specific uses of technology in service of relationships and in service of deepening people's connection to particular places by using the tools for conviviality rather than having the tools use us.
Well, I'm an Aries, so I personally have never been wrong in my life. That was a joke. Thanks for the one. The one person laugh. I think I have been noticed. I often notice the things that I feel caught in the tension of, like the things where I really think both are true, and it's hard for me to know where to focus. And sometimes I notice over time that my focus has really changed on this thing that I thought I was really committed to this side of the spectrum, but now I find myself over here. And one of those things for me lately has been about the tension between reform and preservation. Where are the places in civic life where things aren't working? We need a new solution. We need to do something brand new. We need to figure out the innovative solution to this problem that we've never been able to solve. And where are the moments where there are actually people who have deep knowledge or who have been doing this thing, or there is an example of an institution that's working, even though institutions generally are failing, or a piece of a shared myth that we don't want to dissolve completely. And I notice myself in moments sort of realizing how interested I am in preservation as a combined strategy with re-envisioning the things that need so desperately to be reimagined in society. And I guess I mentioned that one because I am usually scared to admit it. And I think it can be useful to figure out where the places in civic life where we can admit the things about ourselves that are even surprising to us. And that's been one for me lately.
All right, I have one final question, then we'll open up for the audience. And Angel, you kind of addressed this, but what does success look like
I think, like what I said before, success looks like that. It looks like the people who are attending whatever it is that I'm putting together, actually implementing and using what they learn or what they experience in their real life, and not just being able to take something, experience something in real time, and then as soon as they walk out the room, forgetting it, And for me, that was super important because even in the conversation of trying to get, or the conversation of taking feedback from individuals and people who are telling you that what you're doing isn't really working, or that they don't feel connected to it. It's just being able to hear that, take that in, but also being able to shift and mold things to make sure that I'm not just being selfish and I'm not just experiencing and thinking from my point of view when I'm put here to put together an experience and create things for other people outside of me. And yeah.
Anyone else?
I think there's a question of what is success. There's a question of how do you get there, and there's a question of time scale between what success is and how you get there. I will just say I think the time scale that we're talking about for a question like the topic of this panel, I think the fact that you use century, I think centuries is the time scale. It took decades and generations for us to get to this place, and I think we'd be deceiving ourselves if we thought it's not going to be generational work. So I think just grounding in that element that there is no quick fix, there is no silver bullet. When I think of success, it's to me, it's contextual and it's a feeling. I want my kids and their kids to be able to be born into a world where relationships are more gifts to be inherited rather than entrepreneurial prizes to be earned. I want a world where they feel like they have a sense of agency and influence over their own environment, and their environment is not exerting agency and influence over them. I want them to have many of these overlapping webs of association, so if one breaks, that's not the only thing, and that our belonging isn't so brittle. I want those, I want life to feel, I want their lives to feel wondrous and enchanted and full of awe, and not a malaise and autonomous and sterile. So that's a spiritual future. I think the answer is what I started with in the beginning, which is I think what all of us in different ways are working towards, which is how do we equip more people to be more just more supported, prepared to do the work of strengthening the communal life of their places for longer periods of time. That is the opposite of the silver bullet. The silver bullet is us in our particular places doing that particular work and not feeling like what is right now, which is this, what I kind of think about. I think about burnout as not a mental health issue, but far too few people in our population either shouldering the burdens of care or shouldering the burdens of protection, and that weight feels like it's on your shoulders while no one else is carrying that. We want more people carrying the burdens, the responsibilities, the joys of protection, of care, so that it is a shared experience and not what it is right now, which is a small slice of people who are doing that work. And it feels like, for the people doing that work, it feels like their backs are going to break at any moment.
Yeah, I think when I think about what is the most tangible way I could describe my answer to this question, I think my vision for success, our vision for success at Citizen University, is that people and communities have the skills to help each other, the skills to co-design their reality, but really specifically, everyone in a community knows who helps them when they need help and knows what they can give, who they can help, and that everyone has both. and that maybe the scale of one is different from the scale of the other. Maybe some people in a community need a lot more than they have to give. Or maybe some people in a community have a lot more to give than they need to receive. Although I would challenge that one a lot of the time. But I think this idea that, like, I think you said this, right? Of like, there's like a give and a take of relationship that brings us into this civic connection, that it's not only about giving, it can't be. It's not only about taking, it can't be. And so I think communities are civically connected, civic culture is strong when everyone understands the way that, like, they lean on the group, and then the way that the group shifts because of who's leaning in what direction, and that actually creates the stability we need to stay upright together.
All right, any questions from the audience?
I'm just curious. Thank you. Great job. This is really cool. Thank you for facilitating the questions. You had said something about like the web of associations of different civic groups. So just curious for all of you, what's like a civic organization that you love spending time with that's not one that like you work for or run?
So in New Haven, there are a bunch. I'm a former New Haven school teacher, but Concat in New Haven, Concorp, they're fantastic. Friends Center for Children's fantastic. So there are a lot of kind of nonprofits doing incredible work. There's also, to me, a lot of things that are more kind of just informal, and so don't have all these labels or so on and so forth, but just are gatherings of individuals around common areas of interest that pop up on occasion that really are compelling, and certainly are one that I'm actively involved in across the state.
I think for me, one organization that I can think of that I don't work for, is not the New Haven Green, but because that was going to be my answer, was Next Haven. Next Haven is a nonprofit organization on Henry Street, and their goal is bringing people together, but specifically giving artists the tools that they need for them to build to grow and actually succeed in the art world. And yeah, I think that's a great example for me, because I am also very much an artist and very much into culture and very much in spaces a lot of times with people that don't look like me or don't think the same way that I think. And I think Next Haven does a good job at creating a safe space for people like that. You know?
I think my favorite civic circle of association is my town. I live in a small town in Oregon, and on the first Friday, it's Friday Art Walk in the downtown, and I sometimes help my friends with events at their place, or sometimes I just go downtown and know for sure I'm going to see like 20 people I know, and we're going to hang out, and we're going to look at something beautiful, and we're going to check in, and I think the regularity of that, and sort of the center around creativity and the arts, and what that allows people to like lean towards and unlock in this moment of really getting to be together, this like regular moment of checking in, is something that I just super cherish and would love to help spread.
I'll always pitch the YMCA. I think the YMCA is the most untapped civic resource in this country, and I think of YMCA has the potential to be like a thick community, like a church is a thick community. You go to church, you get invited to join the men's group, you get invited to join the Bible. I'm Jewish, I don't even know this, but that's what I've been told. At Temple, they're like, oh, get out. Anyway, and it's like, but the YMCA, I've had that experience, right? I was a gym rat I was just going and shooting for 4 hours a day at the gym. They're like, hey, do you want to mop the court? And so that was my first job. That was my community, playing pickup basketball. And now wherever I go, I have a pickup basketball community through the Y. And I think of the Y as a potential of becoming a club of clubs again, in some ways, where you can kind of deepen that community. You enter for the gym, but then you find your parents group, you find your basketball club. You don't want to do have screens at the Y. And so from 7 to 9 a.m. on Saturday mornings, the Y has screen-free mornings, so you can actually talk to people and not have people with their headphones in. Like, I think the Y is where it's at.
Any other questions from the audience? I can.
No, this is
Zoe Cheryl.
She must.
Thank you. My name is Eitan. I'm a student here at the School of Management. I want to chat after anyway about like MBA, business school. But I think broadly, I'm really curious about like what do you imagine is the role for the people in this room to be a part of this kind of network building? Where are we going? Where do we go from here? Because I also appreciate this. Like, we're not going to solve it with one silver bullet. Like, there's not one innovation that's going to be the change. We need to be layering upon these solutions. Like, I'm curious, like, what is the call to action for folks in the room, in the building?
For me, it just looks like continue showing up in spaces like this and to continue having conversations and being open and not letting one experience from a specific place deter you from showing up and saying your opinions and feeling like your voice matters. And I think for me, as a person who is probably normally trying to create spaces like this, I'll do my best job to be able to hear you and make sure that there's people in the room that you feel connected to and that you, that you just feel connected to and that you'll be heard. But just continue showing up and just try to continue giving back as much feedback as possible, and just to bear with specifically me as I'm trying to build spaces for us to build to grow.
I appreciate that question. That's such a good question to end on. And the power of the folks who come to the Yale Innovation Summit, my goodness, all those folks, every single one of them has the power to do two very specific things: to create and to convene. Very, very tangible, specific things. Imagine if every person in this room and beyond created a solution to a problem in their community, whatever that means. Imagine if they did that. And two, imagine if they convened. We all have the power to convene, but not just your friends or the folks who show up because you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or you're something else. But imagine if you convened a group of folks intentionally from different walks of life for the purpose of getting to know each other so that one day you can actually love each other. We all have the power to convene. We could each do that within a day. And if we all did that, think about how that adds up collectively.
I think I'll jump on that also to say that at Citizen University, we have like an equation of citizenship, and it's power plus character equals citizenship. So I'm going to throw another C in the mix, which is choice. I think that it's super important for everyone, but particularly people who are on a pathway to access a lot of power, to get really clear about what your personal values are, and to erase from your mind the idea of work-life separation or whatever, work-life balance, and to make choices in alignment with your values every time you have a choice to make, whether that's professional or personal life, whatever the case may be, and like to practice that and to build the language around that so that you can talk about it with your family and your friends and your colleagues and in your workplace of like what does it look like to make all the choices in the day with a sense of responsibility to something bigger than yourself. And you need to be in proximity with each other. You need to be in these overlapping networks of care and fun and delight and play and commitment and protection in order to sharpen your sense of your own values and then in order to practice the skill of making those choices every time. That's what I would say.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I don't know who's in this room. I don't know, you might be the only MBA student, so anyway, I think there is every institution, like it or not, carries a telos, it carries a sense of principles, it carries a sense of values. And my observation is that schools of management carry a particular set of principles and values that are, for the most part, antithetical to what it means to be in genuine relationship. We think, like, the fact that, like, you're taught to network is that, like, networking is transactional relationships. Relationships are about reciprocity. They're about mutuality, right?